All right, guys, back for part 2 to finish up these notes. So remember, we ended with without the support of the key states of Virginia and New York, the Constitution would fail because they were such important states to the United States at that time. So what we're talking about now is that in Virginia, there were some Federalists there, some names that you might know. James Madison, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson supported the Federalists, and Patrick Henry, James Monroe, George Mason were the anti-Federalists in Virginia. New York was deadlocked until Alexander Hamilton helped turn the tide for the Federalists. So we're not going to write anything down there. We're just talking about it. So that's how they were able to get some support with those key people. So your next heading is going to be titled Success. So when Virginia and New York, and you can abbreviate, right? Virginia is VA, New York is NY, ratified the Constitution by narrow votes, so by small margin of votes, success was finally ensured. You also should note that eventually all 13 states ratified the Constitution. Over here on this diagram, it shows when they and what the votes were. So, and it's in chronological order. So Delaware, just for example, they ratified it on December 7th, 1787. The vote was 30-0. Pennsylvania, December 12th, 46-23. But notice the years, so it starts going into 1788 all the way down to 1790. So Rhode Island ratified, and look how close that vote was. Virginia was also very close, 89-79. New York, 30-27. So even though you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 states that ratified it, which met the constitutional requirements, these 2 key states, without it, it would have failed. So they needed the support. So that's why those states were so important at that time. All right, so now our next heading is inauguration. So remember, the Constitution called for 3 branches: legislative, which is Congress; executive, which is president; and judicial, which is the court system. So our heading is inauguration. And the Confederation Congress chose New York City as the temporary capital. So Congress chose New York City in New York as the temporary capital of the United States. So maybe some of you didn't know that New York City was actually the first capital of the United States. The new U.S. Congress met in 1789 in New York City. So inauguration continued, no new heading. A name you're probably familiar with. George Washington was chosen as the first president by unanimous vote of electors. So the election wasn't like the elections we have today because, they don't have the technology that we have today. But there were electors chosen, people who were allowed to vote at the time. And George Washington was unanimously voted as president. He took office on April 30th. What you need to know is that John Adams was vice president. So George Washington was the first president of the United States. John Adams was the first vice president of the United States. And that is the end of the notes for Chapter 2, Section 5. If you haven't done your focus question, you need to please go and do that. And there will be some follow-up questions about these tomorrow.